couple of commercials. I butchered this last worship service. We have a Christmas luncheon here, dinner here, on Christmas Day. That is for those in our community that don't have a place to go, which also includes our homeless community that we serve on every Saturday morning. And so we have this dinner, and everyone is welcome to come participate and sit with them and talk and visit and do the things you need to do with them to make them feel that they are worthy. And you'll find out that you're being blessed by doing so. But this year, we're going to give them some gifts. And the gifts we're going to try to give them is going to come from you, and that gift is going to be socks. But not just any socks, right? They have to have something on those socks, and I butchered it last time. I said oil of Olay, but that's wrong. Dan, where are you? Oh, he left. He didn't want to see me butcher it again. Aloe oil, that's what it is. See, it's a little different, isn't it? So anyway, we do aloe oil with socks. There's some socks in there, because one of the things that they always talk about that they need is keeping their feet warm. And so every year we're going to try to supply that as well. We get to do coats and everything else. But for you to go to the store when you're out doing your shopping and stuff, get those socks, find those special socks. If you can't find those socks, just get a bunch of thick socks for them to wear so they can keep their feet warm on this time of year. Also next Sunday is our Christmas party for the church. The choir is preparing a cantata that's in your bulletin, so you'll have it in there. It starts at 6 o'clock here, and we're going to celebrate. And then we go back into Covet Hall and the big fellowship hall back there, and everyone is invited to bring their favorite sugar, right? Because this is where we get the kids all sugared up, and then we send them home with parents. And I'm going to do that this year, so I don't have kids. But anyway, so those are two big announcements you have to do. So we're doing this, as you can tell, it's the second Advent, and so we've been throwing that word around. It's kind of a churchy word that we use, Advent. And it kind of is a season that's about 4 Sundays long, and the closer you get to that fourth Sunday, the more intense it kind of gets, because this is the time we start to prepare for this coming of Jesus, this birth of Jesus into our lives. And so one of the things that we're trying to do to prepare ourselves for this birth is that we are trying to remember the story of God that kind of intervenes into our busy schedules this time of season, isn't it? But it's a pretty neat story that we hear about. It's a story about a God who looks down upon us, a God who is distant, like that eye up in the stained glass window, who just kind of looks down and sees creation and finds us just as we are, not doing too well, arguing with one another, not getting along, trying to step on each other, warring people. And then God has chosen to intervene. God has chosen to come down and to visit us and to love us. So God chooses to love us so that we may learn how to live in harmony with one another, how to live out of love. But the strange thing about how the story picks up is that when God comes down in the form of a child, nobody recognized him. They didn't even know that God was among them, if you can imagine. People are so busy doing whatever people do, whatever we do, that they weren't even able to notice that God was among them. That we're too busy in our own lives. And so God chose then to forgive us, to be merciful to us. And then God did the unthinkable. And I want you to visualize this for a minute. The most powerful entity in the world comes down upon us and takes on the form of a servant. And this God, who is so above us, comes down below us to watch our feet. Why would God do that? God was not only showing us what love meant and what love does, but also was showing us how we should be able to live in harmony with each other. If we're so worried about serving one another, about being servants to each other, and keeping ourselves humble and mild. That we're not worried about stepping on people because you can't. You're at their feet. And so then, the story doesn't stop there. The story of the birth of Christ then begins with the process of empowering people like you and everyone. Began the process of empowering people to do the exact same thing to each other so that people could really understand what this God of mercy and grace is all about. That's what we're trying to recapture this Advent season so we can prepare ourselves for God who comes to us. It's as simple as that, folks. And I don't know where all this complicated stuff comes from. We start to say who's in and who's out, who's right and who's wrong. That's not a part of the story. The only part of the story that we need to concern ourselves with and consume ourselves with is taking on the form of a servant as God did through this person in Jesus Christ and learn how to serve and love and be compassionate to people. All people. Everyone. Even the ones we were taught as a young child not to like. Who were those sinners? Every human being created in the image of God. We are called to serve them. Can you do that with pride? No. You do that on your hands and your knees. Favorite image I heard of a song, country western song, was to stand tall on your knees. Be proud to be a servant of Jesus Christ. So we introduced this last Sunday, the season of Advent. The first Sunday we talked a little bit about what? Just hope. Yeah. Sometimes I lose hope. We talked about hope, and so today we're going to talk a little bit about peace and what that peace means to us. And so this day we're going to recognize peace because to me it's one of the other adjectives that describe who this Jesus figure is. But Jesus is the Prince of Peace. We've heard that said a few times. But peace is not the same definition that we hear about or read about in schools or even in our culture. It's a little bit different because this peace that we talk about only comes from God, and this peace that you receive, you can only receive it through a deeper relationship with God. So it does require a lot of effort on our behalf to try to understand this Prince of Peace and how we can grow and learn and develop to become a people of peace. Because peace is often defined as the absence of war, right? Or those moments without chaos in our lives. Or all the stress that takes place. How many of you have said this? Oh, I just want to get home and have a little bit of time of peace, right? So we think of peace as just that moment, that little bit of moment where we can kind of get our wits together. I don't know about you, but I can't even sleep in peace because my brain is going so fast when I lay down. The first thing I think about when my eyes open up, whether it's 3 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning, somewhere in between that time is what am I doing to do next? It doesn't slow down. And so we think of peace as just that moment where we just get to relax, when the kids aren't running amok, or the boss is cooperative, or all that scheduled things get done. And so now I can just relax and be at peace. Well, that's not the peace that Jesus talks about. Jesus talks about not just the storms of life that hit us and how we can be absent of those storms of life, because the reality of life is that there are storms, are there not? There's chaos everywhere we turn. Am I wrong? You're going to get it today as soon as you walk out these doors. Try to go to the store, it's a mess. Try to go home, sometimes that's going to be a mess. And so escaping the storms of life is not what Christ has to offer. What Christ has to offer is peace. Peace that remains calm, peace that remains confident, peace that is grounded, peace that is unemotional in the midst of storms, in the midst of conflict, in the midst of strife or pain or suffering, or that time of trial that we always find ourselves in from time to time. Being a follower of Christ does not take away the storms. It helps us to cope with the storms. It helps us to walk through the storm with confidence. Even helps us to calm the storms. Because storms are always around us. And some of the storms that we see in life are things that we just don't control, right? It just happens. We can't control weather. We can't control tornadoes. We can't control things that happen in our lives of people we love who get sick or die. We cannot control those things. Storms come from people sometimes who are hurt. And they don't know they hurt. But all they know how to do is to inflict pain on other people because they hurt so much. And if we're intimidated by that pain and those people that hurt, then we're just enabling them and helping them to be a part of the chaos in our lives. The good news is, love will address those pains and those hurts and those storms in other folks. And so what we strive to do next Sunday, we'll talk more about love as a topic, is that love has the answer to how we can calm people's storms in the midst of chaos, right? So today what I want to talk a little bit about is more on direction of peace. Peace that is offered by God and also is seen in this child, in Jesus Christ, that we're preparing ourselves to welcome into the world. And so I want to start with this letter that is written to the Colossians. It's something that Dan just wrote. Now, if you know anything about the letter to Colossians, it's a very interesting letter. Traditionally, it is said that Paul, the Apostle Paul, wrote this letter, but it's more than likely that he didn't. That's not his language. It's not the way he writes. It's not his style. It's not the words that he used. We know that. I'm sure if one of your kids wrote a letter and said it was the other kid, that you read that and go, no, that's not him. That's definitely somebody else. But that doesn't mean that Paul wasn't influenced by it. Paul was said to have been in prison at that time, and very likely it could have happened as one of his people that he trained, like a Timothy or so, was coming to give him, here's what's going on in the church in Colossae. And then Paul says, you know what? I can't write this letter, but here's what you need to tell him. You need to tell him this and this and this and this and this. So please go and share that story with them. And so the letter was written in Paul's name. So it's no big deal who the author was. Nobody cared who the author was. The only thing they cared about was addressing a major issue that was taking place within the Church of Jesus Christ that needed some attention. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, why was this letter actually written to this church? And the answer is the same reason that we write letters or sermons in the life of every church. Because the main problem that we see in church can be addressed in one way. That there are so many major influences in our culture that have a tendency to be brought into the life of the church. And that was causing division. Have you ever experienced that? No, not in America, right? Have we ever experienced that? Has anybody watched Fox News? Anybody watch MSNBC? Two are the same, right? You can't tell one from the other, can you? You read one, you get real good information about what's going on. It's the same thing with CNN and the other two. It's the same thing. So what is the point and purpose of politics? Is it not to divide the country? Is it not to take sides? Red versus blue? Another civil war were taking place. Where's Abraham Lincoln when you need him? Right? That's the whole point and purpose. What's the point and purpose of the life of being the life of the church? It's unity. Two different things, isn't it? I'm going to divide so I can get my way, or I'm going to unite so we all work together. Yeah, there's all sorts of negative influence that come from all around us that starts to penetrate into the life of the church that needs to be addressed, because we are a people of unity, not a people of division. And the only thing that can unite us is that child and what he stands for. and what he encourages us to do with our lives so that we don't lose precious relationships. If we don't do this, then what's the point of him coming down in the first place? So here we are trying to address major influences. And those major influences are so hard to get out of people in that church because it had been ingrained in them from the day they were born that this is how you are to live. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're supposed to believe. And be able to separate yourself from what you have learned from when you're a child, even to an adulthood, is so incredibly difficult to do. But that's what we do. So fast forward at 2,000 years. Here we are. And I want you just to pause just a minute. And I want you to think about all of those influences within our culture, within your life, that prevent you from growing deeply in your relationship with God. How many times have you said, I need to get myself into church, but if I only did this, I could do this. If I had the time or the effort or the energy, but man, I'm so whooped by the time Sunday comes, I just can't get out of bed. Those aren't words of judgments. Those are words of what is influencing your life. We don't need to name them, do we? We know exactly what they are. They consume our time. They increase our stress. They rob us of our sleep. They prevent us from taking time for ourselves and taking care of ourselves. They also keep us from deepening our relationship with God and with other people. But the thought of living without those influences in our lives, have you fantasized about that? It's both exhilarating and fearful, right? We're so afraid because it's been ingrained in us since we were children that this is how we're supposed to live our lives, just like this. We give ourselves to those in authority until there's nothing left for God. But it scares us. It frightens us to think that we have to step outside that box and live a different life. And then all of a sudden we come here on Sunday and we talk about this Prince of Peace, who then tells a message to us, right? That, hey, I created you. And there's a much better way of life for you to live. It's far more fulfilling than what you are living. It'll open your mind and not only bring peace to your life, but to those around you. Influences. And so Paul addresses those because he understands the power of the culture beating down on the people of God. And so he reminds them in this little sentence, in this little paragraph that Dan read. And he starts off with these words. As God's chosen ones, holy and blameless. I think we have to stop there because this is incredibly important for us to read this. This is just one of those greetings, Howdy, y'all. This is something that's extremely important because we have to get into the realization that you are chosen by God to be here. That God has chosen you to do important tasks of representing God in this world. You have to come to the realization that you are holy as God is holy. That you are loved more than what you can even begin to explain to somebody else that you are loved. That there is nothing that you can do that's going to be able to separate you from that love. And being part of the life of the church and being brought in through your baptism, you are now chosen by God to represent this love in the world. So what you do, how you act, how you feel, how you think, how you share your life with others, what you say is so incredibly important because you have the ability to represent the God of grace and glory and honor and hope to the world around you. You're not church members. Ugh, hate that word. You're empowered children of God. You are chosen. You are holy. You are beloved. I can't make you believe that. You have to do that yourself. You have to look yourself in the mirror and see what God created and begin to wonder, how did God create me to be? Why am I so holy? Why am I the one that's chosen? How can God love me so deeply? Because once we claim that we are the ones who have been chosen, that means suddenly we are part of the mission of Jesus Christ. We are part of God's mission in the world. And you have to learn to believe that from the core of your heart, your soul, your whole being. That you are now becoming a part of God's mission in the world. It's not the preacher's job. It's our responsibility. We have a mission to create a better environment for all people. And I mean all people. I don't mean just some people. Think of all those folks that you've been brought up not to like. All those you think should be excluded. All those who just kind of you off. Right? We are to create an environment where all people are a part of this kingdom. Our mission is to influence the culture around us instead of allowing that culture to influence the church of Jesus Christ. And what we have to believe without a doubt is that God is choosing you to do this. Cannot be stated enough. So I guess once we start talking about, well, what is God, how do we influence the world? Then Paul talks about the next statement. The next statement is this. You need to clothe yourself with compassion, with kindness, with meekness, with humility, with patience. Now, this has always been said as the 5 virtues that are required to live in harmony with one another. So I want you to look at those 5 words up there. And I want you to kind of evaluate yourself. How well do you reflect these 5 words? How compassionate are you? How kind are you? And I don't mean just when you're in church, right? I'm talking about when you're when you're in the world, doing everything. When you're in the worst possible situations in life, how well do these 5 things play out in you? How well do you do any of these 5 things? Probably not very well if you're like me. It's hard to do these types of things. But the only way we can find ways of which we can unite ourselves is just to find these 5 things and work on them within ourselves so we can become the people that God needs us to be. You notice if that is what the church requires or God requires of us is to become these 5 things with our lives. Think about how nice it's been that we don't have to argue for God. How nice is it not to have strife in our lives? How nice is it not to condemn people to the gates of hell because we don't like the way they look or think or act? We don't have to do any of that. All that's required of us is how we choose to respond to people with compassion, with kindness, with humility, with meekness, and with patience. Hard things to do because it does require that we clothe ourselves, and clothing means we do the effort, right? We don't wake up like in the Jetsons. We go in there and we get dressed and we take off. It requires a lot of effort on our behalf. And so the letter then will continue. And it says this. Once we begin to do those 5 things naturally with our lives, then what begins to happen? We are going to bear with one another. Now that's an interesting term that's being used. But it simply means that we begin to fully accept other people just as they are. We see them just as they are, as a child of God. And we give them the patience to grow and to develop. They become a part of who we are. And we give them the space to do that. It is a place in the kingdom where nobody is left out. And then Paul continues and say, and see if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other, just as the Lord has forgiven you. So you must forgive. Above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And so now as you're going through these steps, you're all of a sudden becoming accepting of other people just as they are. You don't have to judge them. You don't have to say, well, if I were you, I wouldn't do it that way. You begin to accept people. And when they hurt you, you forgive them. Is it easy for you to forgive people? No. Forgive them anyway. Go ahead and test it. Try it out. It is okay to forgive. And then all of a sudden you're becoming more loving and wanting to be around. And you start to have influence on other people. And all of a sudden all the weight of the shoulders is removed. Because now you don't have to change the world so that you can find a place for you to fit. All of a sudden you begin to change so that you can fit into God's world. It's a big difference. And so we live differently. We act differently. We serve differently. And then we want to live in this thing we call peace. And so that is the final words he says on here, is just let peace of Christ rule your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body. And be what? Thankful. Now I'm going to tell you this, folks. Those things we just talked about up there, sometimes it's going to feel like hitting a round peg in a square hole. But I say, swing hard. Eventually, you'll round up. You have to force yourself sometimes to forgive. You have to force yourself to be kind. Because there's so many patterns of things that we do not do right. If you don't believe that list, I'm on the top of it. And it takes a lot of effort on our behalf to live as God needs us to live, because we do represent God in the world. And there's nothing, I think, in my mind, more greater example than that, than what happens at this table. Because everyone's invited to this table to partake in what Christ is offering us. But you know, we come with all different walks of life. I've had people say, I can't go up there because I've done this or I've done that, and I wouldn't be accepted there. Christ accepts us. Let me tell you what, if Christ can let me come to this table, man, you're more than welcome. Y'all know my garbage. You've seen 25 years of my garbage. But this is what we do, because we have a God that not only believes in us, but also empowers you to take all of our pains and hurts and weaknesses, all of our wounds, and begin the process of working through them so that we can heal the world. That's what we do. So we're going to gather around this table. We're going to share the bread that has been given to us. We're going to share the cup that has been handed to us from the God who is compassionate, who comes down and gives us and shares with us so that we can take it in and to be empowered to change the world. Capiche? Capiche. That's Yiddish for amen. Or something like that. So let us prepare for communion. Let us pray. Almighty and gracious God, it is not easy being us. Everyone in this room thinks we're so unique in the sense that we don't deserve what we get. And that would be what we receive is your love, and we just don't feel like we're worth that because we've done so many things and we don't want people to know. And so we keep those hidden, to the fact that we have a hard time believing in ourselves the way that you believe in us. It's hard. It's hard to walk into this place knowing that your presence is here, and we walk in here and we think that everybody in this place is so incredibly holy except for me. But that's not the case. We're all brothers and sisters in the sense that there's not one single thing that we have done that has earned us the right to be here. We need your presence among us, oh God. We need your Spirit to lift us up. We need to hear your voice that says, I believe in you because I've created you in this image. You're a spitting image of me. I am your God. You're my people. You are my beloved. You are holy. You have been chosen. So take your wounds and heal a broken world. And may these emblems, this bread and this cup, simple emblems that represent your Son, may they heal us, empower us, and allow us to be confident in who you created us to be. We walk to this table on our knees, oh God. But we stand tall, knowing that when we are down is when you rise up. Bless us this day, that we may be a blessing to others. Amen.